My practice is a pretty intuitive practice. I look at the world, I look at the objects that I'm interested in, I do a lot of drawing, and then from that I simplify things down until I find these sort of forms that I think represent or sort of mimic the language that I've looked at in the outside world. Whenever I describe what I made, I usually start by talking about what I did first, which was to have the space empty for 2 days with a dancer that I commissioned, Kyle Kremerskothen. There was very little interjection, I suppose, on my behalf. I didn't ask Kyle to do anything in particular. What we were trying to capture with his work was how to develop a language in an empty space using your body. And I suppose it was going to be a parallel to how I use sculpture in an empty space to develop a language that responded to the space as well as to the body. It became clear over time there was these movements that would recur and there'd be this building up of this language. So then it was a process of working with an editor to extract them and then reposition them in a way that showed that language forming over time. After that, I needed to make a sculptural response, finding forms that both mimicked what Kyle's language had revealed, but also forms that came to me in the space or that came to me through the thoughts about architecture and urban space that I tend to follow in my practice. The process of extracting a sculptural form comes for me through drawing. I'll be thinking or ruminating about a series of sort of thoughts about space or about a feeling of being, and then from that these drawings emerge, and then from those sculpture works kind of eventually form. The objects are kind of familiar objects. They're based on functional things that we might see in the built world, but there's something defunct about most of them. So there's handrails that don't block off anything particular. There's things that a lot of people describe as a ladder, but there's sort of leaning poles with a stick in it, but there's nothing for that metal pole to do. Everything kind of looks vaguely functional, but then when you look closer at it or you imagine trying to use it, they sort of empty themselves out. There's actually nothing you can do with anything that's in here. I didn't see them as separate works. I wanted the space to read as an installation space, not as a series of objects, and that where the dance actually fit into that language or fit into that logic as well. It wasn't really until I was in here and I got some of the key pieces up that I could then start to make those definite connections to the dance work. There were a few things that I knew. I knew that I wanted to have the pole in the doorway, which sort of reveals a domestic scale of architecture to one side, an 800mm gap, but also in the dance Kyle plays with a plank, and he knew that that was of interest to me, that it would become a sort of a measurement or a guide. The work has post-minimalist or eccentric abstraction references in it. It's a reductive practice, but it does come from a drawing practice, which I think adds a sort of poetic fluidity to it. It can be formal in that way, but then there's also a quirky narrative underlying it where things seem to belong to some sort of world or some sort of environment that might be recognisable. The inspiration for my work comes probably equally from theoretical approaches to space, and then observations, the way that things are built, the remnants of things that are built in the built world, and particularly things that guide a choreography of types through the built world for ordinary people that we either notice or sometimes don't notice at all. The standout thing about being in NEW is definitely working at this scale to actually realise some of these things that are quite hard to put in other spaces.